In 2021, Russia exported $14.6 billion worth of weapons. Then, in February 2022, it invaded Ukraine. By the end of the year, its arms exports had fallen to $8 billion, a 45% drop. In 2023, they fell to just $3 billion, a further 62.5% drop. And by the end of 2024, export sales had plummeted to under $1 billion, another reduction of 2/3 year over year. That's a staggering 92% drop in revenue in just 3 years, or 14 times less money coming in to fund the Russian war machine. On the face of it, it's a complete disaster for Russia. It's dropped to 3rd place in the rankings of the world's biggest arms exporters, behind the US, still by far the largest, and France. And to make matters worse, this calamitous plunge in sales has happened as the world splurges more on arms than at any time since the late 1980s. In 2024, total military spending was up almost 10%, hitting $2.7 trillion. It's tempting to conclude that Russia's military-industrial complex is collapsing, in no small part due to the poor performance of its military tech in Ukraine. That's undoubtedly a factor. Potential buyers may have simply been scared off and are now looking to buy their military tech elsewhere. But if you scratch beneath the surface, there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye. And perhaps this optimistic explanation of the situation hides a more nuanced, dangerous reality. One that could come back to kick the West in the backside with a steel-tipped boot if it doesn't heed the warning signs. Here's what's really going on. Between 2020 and 2024, Russia exported arms to at least 33 countries. The largest by far was India, followed by China, Kazakhstan, Algeria, Belarus, Egypt, and Myanmar. The rest, besides Serbia, whose last purchases were in 2021, were all African and Asian nations, ranging from larger regional powers like Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, the UAE, and Nigeria, to relative international minnows like Cambodia, Thailand, Mongolia, Togo, Rwanda, and Ethiopia. However, in 2024, only 11 of those bought arms from Russia: India, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Myanmar, Ethiopia, China, Pakistan, Algeria, Laos, Mali, and Gabon, in order of sales value. So why have Russian arms exports dried up, and are they likely to continue plummeting exponentially down to zero, as the chart suggests? The main factor here is, of course, the consequences of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Firstly, as we've noted, many of Russia's weapons, especially its stockpiles of older Soviet-era systems, simply haven't performed at all well under the rigors of the 21st century's first large-scale conflict between peer or near-peer adversaries. Here on the Military Show channel, you'll find numerous videos detailing the many flaws and inadequacies of Russia's tanks, armored vehicles, artillery systems, fighter planes, and bombers, to name but a few. However, there is little evidence from the public statements of former buyers of Russian arms to suggest that this is the main reason they've stopped. SIRPI, or the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, maintains the most comprehensive, publicly available database on international arms transfers. In their annual report on trends in international arms transfers, released in March 2025, senior researcher Peter Wiesmann says that the drop in sales is because more weapons are needed on the battlefield, trade sanctions make it harder for Russia to produce and sell its weapons, and the USA and its allies pressure states not to buy Russian arms. The mountain of sanctions placed on Russia since its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 has undoubtedly played a big role. Since 2022, over 16,000 sanctions on individuals, 9,200 on companies, and 3,200 on institutions have been imposed, predominantly by the US, EU, and Western nations. But it's the impact of sanctions imposed by President Donald Trump during his first term in 2017 that has probably impacted Russia's arms exports the most. The Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, or CAATSA, imposes sanctions on the defense and intelligence industries of Iran, North Korea, and Russia. But crucially, it also imposes secondary sanctions on countries that deal with those industries. And it's been effective. As early as 2018, the US State Department estimated that foreign governments have abandoned, planned, or announced purchases of several $billion in Russian defense acquisitions. In 2019, the threat of CAATSA-related sanctions caused Indonesia to backtrack from a multi-billion-dollar deal to buy Russian Sukhoi Su-35 jets. Indeed, since the invasion began, pressure has mounted on nations around the world to stop buying arms from Russia entirely. And as the numbers reveal, the proof is in the pudding. India, traditionally one of Russia's closest defense partners, has been purchasing a smorgasbord of military equipment from Russia annually, going back decades. The threat of CAATSA-related sanctions is surely a major factor why, in 2024, it only purchased spare AL-31 engines for its Su-MKI combat aircraft, which are Russian-designed but produced under license in India. Furthermore, delivery of this $3 billion deal is expected to be completed within 8 years, by 2032, which will hopefully be long after the dust on the Ukraine-Russia war has settled. Another factor at play here is the cyclical nature of arms sales, particularly when it comes to high-end items like air defense systems, warships, and fighter aircraft. Unless they're involved in an active conflict, countries don't generally buy these kinds of systems every year. They'll place an order and then receive delivery over the coming years. It may be a decade or more before advances in technology necessitate an upgrade, when further large orders will be placed. This is true for all exporters and importers of arms, not just Russia. So it could be that several of Russia's traditional export partners like Algeria and Egypt are stocked up with systems they bought within the past decade. That means they'll only require spare parts and ammo, such as missiles for air defense systems, until they're ready for a major upgrade. And these upgrades might change the Russian arms exports equation considerably, as we'll discover a little later. However, in terms of influence on Russia's massive drop in arms exports, both sanctions and the cyclical nature of the business pale in comparison to Simon Wiesman, another senior researcher at SIPRI's first point: more weapons are needed on the battlefield. The tremendous attrition rate of every kind of military equipment during the war has required both Russia and Ukraine to divert the vast majority of their arms production towards use on the battlefield rather than exports. Before the war, 2019 to be exact, Ukraine was the world's 12th largest exporter of arms, but from 2020 to 24, it had dropped to 20th. That's not as precipitous a drop as Russia's, but it's in the same ballpark. But Ukraine has the potential to reach $35 billion in defense production for its own use within a year, with a significant focus on strike drones and howitzers. It speaks to the tremendous demand for Ukrainian arms by the Ukrainian armed forces. The defense of the country must take priority over exports while the war rages on, and the Ukrainian defense industry has been in overdrive trying to meet the needs of the battlefield. In Ukraine's case, however, this increased domestic output still hasn't met the demand. As a result, from 2020 to 24, Ukraine became the world's biggest importer of arms, receiving 8.8% of all global arms imported during that period, an increase of more than 100-fold compared to what it imported from 2015 to 19, and that's excluding the tens of billions of dollars provided as economic aid. Russia has faced the same problem, the high demand for Russian arms by its own defense forces in Ukraine, but the export trade has been forced way down the agenda. Iran, for example, ordered 25 Su-35 fighter jets in 2022. While the first 2 jets were delivered in 2024, Iran is facing an indefinite delay in the delivery of the remaining order. In the meantime, since 2023, the Russian Ministry of Defense has announced the delivery of another batch of upgraded Su-35s and newer Su-57Es to its own air force every 2 to 3 months. To meet the demand from its own forces, Russia has ramped up production across the board to a staggering and, frankly, quite intimidating extent. Speaking in February 2024, then Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu claimed, "We have increased the number of tanks almost 6-fold. We are improving and upgrading them. The number of unmanned aerial vehicles has grown 17-fold, and the number of both artillery and jet shells has risen 17.5-fold. In December of that year, Russian First Deputy Prime Minister Denis Manturov stated, "In 2024, the output growth was 2.5 times for combat aviation, 2.5 times for armored vehicles, and 4 times for light armored vehicles. For some artillery items, the growth was more than 15-fold. Western military leaders have also noted the rapid increase in Russia's defense production capacity with alarm. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte noted in February 2025 that Russia is producing in 3 months in ammunition what the whole of the 32-member alliance is producing in the year, and this is simply not sustainable. Also in April, Commander-in-Chief of the NATO Joint Armed Forces in Europe, US General Christopher Cavoli, told the US Senate Committee on the Armed Forces that Washington expects Russia to produce 250,000 artillery shells monthly. That puts it on track to build a stockpile 3 times greater than the United States and Europe combined, he said. He also stated Russia would likely make 1,500 tanks every year, while the US only makes 135 tanks a year. Russian ground forces in Ukraine have lost an estimated 3,000 tanks, 9,000 armored vehicles, 13,000 artillery systems, and over 400 air defense systems in the past year, but is on pace to replace them all, he said. Certainly the evidence suggests that the domestic defense industry is indeed ramping up at an unprecedented pace, Cavoli's words, not ours. To a significant extent, the war has been exactly what a floundering Russian defense industry needed. Before the war, domestic demand was stable but limited, so exports were vital. Russia has always been deeply reluctant to sell its advanced weaponry, but particularly after a Kornet missile sold to Israel ended up being shot down and seized by Hezbollah during the 2006 Lebanon war. Nevertheless, until the late 2010s, it enjoyed a growing trade in its stock items, ranging from the Kalashnikov rifles to the Tu range of tanks and MiG and Su range of jets. This trade was large enough to keep Russia more or less permanently in second place in the global arms exporter rankings, behind the US, whose sales were generally 8 to 10 times larger. However, by the late 2010s, increasing competition from emerging players like China, Turkey, and Israel had already started eating into Russian market share in places like Africa and Southeast Asia, where they'd previously dominated. By 2019, exports had peaked, so by the time the war started, much of the industry, estimated to be around 6,000 companies, had been chugging along, rarely turning a profit for years. But what Russia lacked in efficiency, they made up for in excess capacity and flexibility, and that's exactly what Putin tapped into to enable this massive boost in production. By the fall of 2022, the rapid rate at which they were burning through equipment and ammo, combined with the much stiffer than expected resistance they were encountering, convinced the Russians that they were in it for the long haul in Ukraine. With sanctions biting and an urgent need to sort out both the economy and its army, Russia started transforming into a full-blown economy. Over and above existing capacity, early in 2023, the Russian government transferred more than a dozen plants, including several gunpowder factories, to the state-owned defense conglomerate Rostec. The aim was to modernize and streamline the production of key elements in the war effort. The Kazan gunpowder plant, one of the country's largest, took on more than 500 workers in a December 2023 hiring spree that increased average monthly salaries at the plant more than threefold to 90,000 rubles per month, around $1,100. That's decent money in Russia, especially for lower-rung workers, considering the poverty line there is around $175 per month. So plenty of workers have signed up for the arms factories, and production has gone through the roof as a result. Putin claimed in February 2024 that 520,000 new jobs have been created in the military-industrial complex, which is now estimated to employ over 3.5 million Russians, or 2.5% of the population. This massive wage bill is one of the main reasons that Russia's defense spending for 2025 will be around a third of its GDP. That's substantially less than the 100% of GDP that Ukraine is spending, leaving it wholly reliant on foreign aid and borrowing to cover all its other obligations. But still, it's a much higher proportion than practically any other country on Earth. And a year down the line, production still seems to be ramping up, with no sign of slowing down. In line with Kavoli's calculations, Russian factories claim to have delivered 1,500 main battle tanks in 2023, of which 1,180 to 1,280 had been reactivated from storage. But according to a May 2025 investigation by The Economist, both the Uralvagonzavod and Omsk Transmash plants, Russia's largest tank factories, saw significantly higher activity in 2024 than in 23. The same goes for the Arzamas plant, which produces armored personnel carriers, and the Kurgan Mashzavod and Motovelika plants, which make infantry fighting vehicles. The Yekaterinburg Factory No. 9, which produces the barrels for howitzers and tanks, and NPO Novata, which develops Iskander ballistic missiles, are also blooming. So are Volgograd Titan Barakadi, where Iskander launch systems are built, and MPO Splav in Tula, which makes Grad, Uragan, and Smerch rockets. The report also notes rising activity at the Alabuga plant in Tatarstan, where Iranian Shahid 136 kamikaze drones and their Russian analogs, the Gerans, are produced. To be sure, much of this production is focused on hauling outdated gear out of storage and trying to spruce it up for use on the Ukrainian battlefield. In particular, most of the tank output is not the brand new TM90M, Proriev, but refurbished versions of much older T-80 and T-72s. Plenty of rusty Soviet-era artillery systems have had new turrets and barrels fitted, along with electronic warfare and anti-drone components. And judging by the rate at which they've been dropping them, the conversion of outdated glide bombs into deadly Fab 500 to 1500 and 3000 missiles by the addition of UPMK correction modules continues at breakneck pace. However, Russia isn't just refurbishing old weapons. The fact is that the war in Ukraine has changed the face of warfare forever. The age of the tank battle and close combat air superiority dogfights is over. We exist now in a reality of unmanned vehicles in the air, on land, and at sea, electronic warfare, precision-guided hypersonic missiles, AI-enabled drone swarms, and stealth. The Houthis reportedly shot down 7 $30 million plus MQ-9 Reaper drones in a month, with missiles costing a few $1,000s. Ukraine is using $4 million Patriot and 400,000 NASAMS missiles to shoot down Russian Geran 2s, which cost $30,000 to $80,000. The Bradley may be a much better IFV than the Russian BMP-4, even by Russian admission, but the many lying burnt out in the Ukrainian and Kursk countryside tell us that they're not immune to a well-placed strike with a cheap, simple FPV loitering munition guided via fiber optic cable. The ballpark has shifted, and everybody, including Russia, Ukraine, China, and the whole of NATO, is frantically trying to catch up. The new arms race, so evident from SIPRI's numbers, is not so much about boosting stockpiles of existing weapons, but hastily implementing one of those major upgrades we mentioned earlier. And in this regard, Russia's switch to a full-blown war economy has given it a serious head start. Ukraine has been the perfect opportunity for both Russia and the many nations that have provided weapons to Ukraine to test out their latest systems in real, deadly combat, and for extended periods. The The longer the war drags on, the more time both sides have to tweak their weapons, test them, then retweak and retest until they're production ready. Western backers have been reluctant to hand over the most advanced tech to Ukraine for similar reasons as the Russians, the fear of the weapons falling into enemy hands. They're also, to an extent, hamstrung by the need for parliamentary approval and budget sign-offs before sending advanced gear to Ukraine. Unconstrained by these handicaps with military production in full swing, Russia has forged ahead with testing and introducing new weapons, which it can justifiably claim are battleground tested. For example, the newer versions of the TM90M Proriev and T72B3M tanks unveiled at the Victory Day parade in May 2025 include electronic warfare systems and special net cages to defeat enemy drones. They also include rubber-reinforced protection installed on the rear of the turret and the engine transmission compartment, two major known vulnerabilities. Other recently showcased gear built for 21st century warfare includes the Kamov Ka-52 attack helicopter, the virtually silent Supercam S-350M reconnaissance drone, Plaston unmanned all-terrain transport vehicles, upgraded Lancet-E Zala loitering munition, Mirage drone encryption system, which hides FPV drones from detection, and Kalinka monitoring systems, designed to detect and locate signals emitted by satellite communications stations such as Starlink. All of these systems have now become available for export, and according to the Russians, there's already healthy demand. At least 13 countries are reported to have expressed an interest in buying Russia's $500 million S-400 air defense system, including Qatar, Egypt, Morocco, Vietnam, and Iraq. But there's plenty of interest in a wide variety of other systems, according to Resorber on Export, the official state arms export agency. Following the LAD 2025 Defense Expo in Brazil in April 2025, the agency claimed that it was in talks with partners across Latin America, the Asia-Pacific, Africa, the Middle East, and the Commonwealth of Independent States, or CIS, for more than 100 cutting-edge defense projects worth over $30 billion. The projects include small arms and ammunition, advanced air defense systems, multi-purpose helicopters like the Ka-226T, Su-57E fighter jets and aircraft engines, state-of-the-art air-to-air missiles, UAVs like the Orlan-10E, Orlan-30, and Orion-E, next-generation loitering munitions such as the Cub series, and electronic warfare technology. They could be lying or exaggerating, but perhaps, to butcher the famous saying attributed to Mark Twain, rumors of the demise of Russian arms exports have been greatly exaggerated. Importantly, the agency noted that the projects will be focused on joint production of Russian defense products with an emphasis on manufacturing in partner countries. These military technical partnerships, as Putin likes to call them, have been one of the key but understated ways that Russia has been able to maintain its military influence in places like Central Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, even as export sales plummet. In 2023, Putin claimed to have 40 such agreements in place, just with African states. Joint production of Russian weapons under license, such as the Su-30MK deal with India and a proposed deal with Egypt to produce TM90MS tanks in the country, provides a loophole by which to slip past CAATSA-type sanctions. So it's entirely understandable why Russia would be seeking and encouraging such arrangements, and it could become vitally important for the West to nip all of this in the bud. Sooner or later, the Ukraine war will end. It may end with a complete capitulation of Russia and the destruction of its military-industrial complex. However, at this point that looks highly unlikely. What's much more likely is that Russia will be left with a war economy on which millions of Russians depend, growing stockpiles of numerous increasingly advanced weapons, nowhere to expend them, and plenty of sanctions. If that's the case, Russia will surely look to exports, whether directly or through partnerships, and this could have profoundly negative consequences for the West. Firstly, Russia would likely claw back market share all over the developing world, taking it away from the likes of the US, UK, and France. As noted, it has a head start in various areas and also in general, the ability to produce weapons for a fraction of the cost of the US due to its much lower domestic input costs. Secondly, and more importantly, combining military technical agreements with joint production of Russian weapons and traditional arms sales will give Russia deep, long-term influence in partner countries. We've already seen how Russia's influence in the Sahel states has led to France being unceremoniously ousted from a large swathe of its former colonies, losing gold and uranium mines and much else in the process. The West can't afford for this kind of infection to become a contagion. Upgrades to Western arms systems are already well underway, although possibly not near the pace of Russia, at least yet. The sooner it upgrades its own export arms offerings to take account of the new reality, the better. Chances are, just like the last generation, the next generation of Western weapons will ultimately be much better than the Russian ones. But what do you think? Is the Russian arms industry burnt toast or busy making a comeback? Which new school Russian weapons worry you, if any, and why? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you, as always, for watching.